We'll give you the short version.
You might watch it. So.
Yeah, I'm sure he's gonna watch.
There's a live stream. I should have told Colby. He's very intrigued by all of this.
Yeah.
He lives in Wildwood.
Yeah.
Yeah, bring it.
Well, they're all archived, so we can.
Oh, no. I'll make sure he knows.
Okay.
Well, if he is watching, you say, I'm going to be a little bit late tomorrow.
Just for me?
Take care of a few errands.
Yeah, I might take a day off.
Thank you.
Forgot about something that Dave sent me upstairs. Have you seen that before? Interesting.
The right one.
Rick, was Debbie going to be with us tonight or just going forward, be available?
No, I did not, we didn't invite her to this
Okay.
meeting, but depending on what you want, we could try to get her into the next meeting, or what I was thinking, trying to get ahead of ourselves, maybe going to try to, at an end, meet with her in the meantime, and explain what we're wanting to do.
Well, if she already has experience working with getting stuff on the city's website, I mean, that's just a no-brainer as far as, once with craft in rough outline kind of form, this is what we had in mind, just turn her loose and let her do what she does.
Yeah, she does a good job of developing content based on what we're looking for. You ready?
All right, good evening. This is the October 1st meeting for the Board of Public Safety, Deer Management Subcommittee. I'm Dave Williams. I am the committee chair. And I'd like to go ahead and call this meeting to order. Michelle, if you could call the roll, please.
Chair Dave Williams,
Here.
Marshall Scott Collier,
Here.
okay, Sergeant Winley,
Here.
Sarah Von Wert. Here. And
Here.
You are here, right?
We are.
Just to be clear, we are live streaming this meeting.
Thank you.
Just a reminder.
Next item on the agenda is approval of minutes from our last meeting on August 27th. Those have been passed out, and I think we've each had a couple of minutes to kind of go through there. If anyone has any questions or needs clarification, we can spend a couple of moments on that.
I apologize, we had some difficulty getting stuff posted, and we'll try to do better next time to get that to you in advance, so you get a chance to read it before the meeting. That would be the intent, rather than handing it out the night of.
Right. Not a problem.
You want to defer action on it, I'm sure you could wait until the following meeting. It's up to you. Understand, you have that chance.
In the absence of any questions, I would entertain a motion to have the minutes of the last meeting approved. So do I have a second?
I'll second
Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is public comment. Seeing that our room is rather empty in the back, it looks like we do not have any public comments. Next item on the agenda is the development of a resident survey. Sarah, was that something you were going to?
you want to speak to kind of what you put in the packets?
Sure, is that okay?
Yeah, Michelle's been doing a little bit of digging on this topic.
So what I decided to do was just kind of create a survey. Well, what I started doing first is looking at other surveys that were maybe had some similar content to what we have been talking about and had similar land use to what is going on in Wildwood. So this one in Avon Lake, Ohio, it just seemed like, you know, semi-rural town. You know, it's a small town, but they do have some deer issues. And they had a really easy access survey in the front. So I was basically just mining these for questions and looking for relationships with everything we've talked about with our problems with deer. And this one is really nice because it has a lot of, you know, a lot of just good graphics for results and stuff that we can look at to kind of hone in on what our goals are for these surveys. We got from Aaron Shank. This is the 2004 West St. Louis County Deer Task Force Survey. It's a resident attitude survey. So they did all of West County. This section right here is just Wildwood. If you want to see the inclusive all of West County survey results, I do have that. So this is a pretty broad opinion survey, and what you're looking at with this is basically the results. So it kind of takes a while to go through it because there's only 2 results on the page, but it was a pretty long one. And then the other one is a survey done, I think that's by Cornell University, and it's much more academic. And it is, but I thought it was interesting because it was for an area of New York that has kind of a mixed use of recreation, farming, residential, you know, land enjoyment type. I mean, it was very mixed. So I thought this survey was kind of relative to us because they have all the same problems and they probably have all the same people that enjoy, you know, living out here because they, you know, like wildlife and forests and things like that. So you'll notice the numbers with this one. This one was 94 pages. So I just kind of gave you the cliff notes. If you want, you know, the full Monty, I can send you the link. So anyway, so I kind of went through those, and then the survey questions that I came up with were really based on what we've been talking about. So landscape damage, deer strikes, chronic waste and
That's
feeding.
this piece of paper that you had that Michelle's kind of put together that she's referring to.
You know, or the deer sampling survey, and maybe a preference for deer management strategies. So I thought it was good to keep it just 10 questions, 1 page, maybe to educate a little bit, like prior to each question, so that people have to think a little, and then at the end of it, what I'm proposing is to maybe have a learn more at cityofwildwood.com, and then have either a deer page or a page that's called like Wildlife in Wildwood. That's what I really like. But and then you can have the deer as part of that to kind of put it all in the context. And then, you know, with that, we'll have the links to all of these things that we've been looking at, all of these, you know, the sampling studies and the deer strikes, and as well as some other things. Those last 2 pages I gave to you were the education. Where did it go? So some other things that could possibly be there could be a crash report studies, the dangers of overpopulation, and then links to CWD and blue tongue and why you shouldn't feed them, current hunting regulations, and then just an example. I gave you this ways to avoid hitting a deer. This is on the Town and Country website, and it's really interesting. I don't know, I did not background check this.
Good enough.
But it seems reasonable. So, and then the other thing was, you know, like scare tactics, things like that, maybe some landscaping that deer do not eat. You know, some things maybe we want to look into a little more.
I like the way that this is put together, and I like the wildlife of Wildwood naming as well. I think that it's catchy enough that people are going to remember that. And if we make deer a part of that, you know, it's going to click in people's heads. The one observation I had just on the survey is maybe, you know, somewhere near the top, if we're saying how big is your property, we could also ask people, what ward do you live in? Some people might not know, so maybe if there's like an interactive map you could link to in the survey, or?
We do have that.
Maps are, is there does someone here know about GIS?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there a layer with the wards on it?
We do have actually a working map with
Okay, yeah.
words on it.
Mhm. We just,
So if we do
just
Survey
completed that.
Monkey, it has varying success using GIS and Survey Monkey. Sometimes it gets a little glitchy, but we can, if I can get that layer from one of you.
They actually made it a working URL that you can click on even on our website,
Okay.
so I think you should be able to put it in.
Okay,
Yeah,
can
you
you
can.
send that to me?
Yeah, you
just send me
can
the link.
plug your address right in there,
Yeah.
and then it tells you what word.
Oh, okay, yeah, we can just use the link to that, that works.
That was going to be my question, is like
Yeah.
regardless of any kind of visual, just type it in.
Yeah,
and
if
then-
you already have the application, so if you could just send
Perfect.
me that, I can incorporate it. That'll be the easiest method for sure, since you already have it.
The other comment I had about the survey is I think 10 questions, maybe 12 at the very most, is right about where we need to be. Otherwise, people are going to be like, this is one of those tests I had to do in high school where I had to answer questions. And
Scantron.
I'm afraid of doorknobs and things like that. So,
Sure.
so yeah, I think this is good information. And as far as anything that we put like on a website, I think the construct, what this is kind of like, what you had in other areas is just like, it's like nipping at the edges of, here's just a bullet point of like, did you know, here's information about this. And if you want to learn more, go here and you can get the full, 50, 60 page, kind of like if you're, wanting to get all that information. But just as far as like, and I think that that's a good formatting, type of thing to have, is because most people are just going to want to, oh, I can't feed the deer? Okay, that's enough for me. And then they go on to the next thing. X number of people out of 100 are going to say, well, why can't I feed the deer? We don't have to tell them on that page. They can go to a different page and read, in full detail about that. So less is more, and then you put the detail behind it for the people who want to see it. So I think this is a great start.
Yeah, I completely agree. We don't want to make it much longer than this. I would probably advise adding a question about how long have you lived in Wildwood, since some of these questions ask about like in the past few years, I thought, or something like that. If someone's newer and they've only lived in Wildwood for a year, they might not know as much about this topic, and they might not have as much interest.
Sure.
So if you have a lot of people who are recent to the area, take the survey, and then you don't get a lot of interest about changing things, it doesn't necessarily mean that's how everyone feels in Wildwood,
Okay.
or how they will feel in a couple of years. Other than that, I would say I'll probably restructure it slightly. I'll probably make questions 2, 3, and 4 be sub-questions, kind of how in the Cornell one, it has like these tables. Just because, again, that kind of makes people feel like they're doing less.
Sure.
It's good to make people feel
Yeah,
like
and
they're doing
just
less.
know, I'm 100% flexible on this.
Yeah.
This is just kind of what ended up on the page.
And then the only,
after looking through things that
yeah, I think
whatever.
it's great. The only other thing I would probably say is, in particular with the education, the preference for deer management strategies, we're definitely going to need to have information about what those do, because one of the things that my supervisor, who is a Wildwood resident, pointed out to me is he is really unwilling to say which thing he thinks would be best without knowing more information about those things, including how much it's going to cost the city to
Okay.
implement these different things.
Like, that was a really important thing to him personally. And I mean, he's only one resident, but he's the only one I've communicated with, so.
How would you
I probably
structure that
wouldn't restructure the question.
question?
I would either link to something that has the education, or just in the top bit, kind of put something in to give some education there.
And that might be a good segue to the other question that I had, as far as possibly putting something at the end of this. If you're going through this survey, and again, Sarah, you know how all this stuff works better than any of us. If you do the survey, is there a way that you could, okay, now that you're done with your survey, please watch this short 2-minute, 3-minute video that talks about what we're trying to do, so we can put the human touch on maybe some of these things about strategies.
I'd say you probably want to do that before.
Okay.
Just because you don't want to have them answer everything and then teach them.
But putting the video, mixing it with the Survey Monkey piece is possible to either have, regardless of where you put it
Let me
on
look
the
into that.
itinerary.
Yeah, let me look into
Okay.
it. I can find that out.
Because I think that that's a good way to, because just like what you were saying, is there's only so much that you can glean from something like this if you don't know, for example, well, what does HOA mean? I mean,
Yeah.
HOA Common Ground, is that like KOA? Is that a campground, or, you know, we
Yeah.
know what it means, but
Yeah.
Maybe a resident doesn't know what it means. So the human touch, regardless where you put it, I think could really
Yeah.
carry a lot of weight in something like this.
Well, that's something that could be added to, like, at the bottom, to learn more.
Yeah.
So it's too much for like infographics at the beginning and then, or something along
I
that
could
line?
see if I would be able to, I don't know that an infographic would necessarily be the way I would want to teach about these specific items. I think I would probably want to do like a chart or something. In one of the documents you gave me, Sergeant Wendling sent me a couple of documents in the how to create the deer management plan. I actually looked through that, and they have like a chart showing some of how they describe like the costs and everything of these different things and how effective they are in actually changing a population and what style of population they're particularly effective in changing. Like, is it for an expansive area, or is it for a population that's really just in one specific area? So I was thinking something like that,
Okay.
even just that page of the document or something. If I could link a PDF there at least for them to learn more there. I'll see what I can
Yeah.
do.
So it's a lot of information in it.
Yeah, I think an infographic would just be overwhelming for
Right.
that specific piece.
Do you think for number 10, it could be, the question could actually be like, would you, let's see, how would you feel, I would word it differently than this, so it sounded better, but basically, how would you feel if the city of Wildwood instituted the following deer management strategies? And then you can have yes or no in front of each.
Is it kind of like, would you be in favor of this, yes or no?
Would you be in favor of?
How do you feel?
Yeah.
What's your opinion about?
And we could even do another one. I like the structure in the Cornell report, the aggregated one. I really like this structure for questions. Again, you can ask a little bit more and get by with it. I would actually say that that's a better option, because if you choose this ranking one, the other issue is dealing with ranks is really complicated.
Right,
When you go to aggregate the numbers.
When you go to pull the data, it's weird, isn't it?
Because you have to decide what a 1 is versus a 2, and decide how you want to deal with these different ranks. So I would say that's what I would have defaulted to, would be a yes, no, even though this probably looks nicer on the page.
I wanted to just try to figure out a way to put it out there.
Yeah,
it's
so-
just kind of a starting point.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
great too. I'm very grateful for it. But,
Yeah, I think this is,
And I think that question kind of gets to, the issue for some people. Some people are going to prefer maybe a more passive approach, right? And some people, perhaps a more aggressive approach. And it sort of gives you an idea, when we get this, to say we get 100 people that answered or whatever, you get an idea of how passionate are they about this, and which way are folks leaning,
Yeah.
if you will. So I think it's good to have a sort of ranking, but I see what you're saying.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I do like the structure that those questions.
I mean,
So I think it's important.
Yeah. if we can come up with something that everyone agrees is a good way to deal with the ranking, it's not impossible to do.
Right.
It's just a lot less
Right.
clean, it's a lot less, it's a lot harder to
And I think if you're
interpret
gonna do that
results.
through here, you gotta be consistent, so
Yes.
you're not changing the definitions all over the page.
Yeah.
This time a 6 is,
Yeah.
more important than 1.
Right.
So you could do like not at all interested, slightly
Exactly,
interested,
yeah.
moderately interested, or something like that.
Yeah, liker scales are usually a good thing to have. Those are what those are called.
Okay.
Well, Michelle, this is a great start. Thank you for putting
Yes.
this together.
Absolutely.
It's,
So what I can do is I can take this and I can make a sample survey, and then I can send it to Sergeant Wendling, he can send it out to all of you guys, and you can all just take it and give me feedback of what you'd like changed, whatever. It'll be, should be able to get something put together within the next week or so.
The question on that is related to kind of coming up with a mock-up or a beta version of this. Would it be helpful at all to have like a test group or, a sample, like maybe 20 people, 20 residents that, if each of us picked 3 neighbors, we'd have 20 of people to come in and, take this little test or survey. And then at the end, tell us how they feel about it. Would that be beneficial to you in terms of like, does it work, does it not work? What did you like, what did you not like?
If you want.
Okay.
We've got the city hall staff, we can do
Yeah,
that if you want.
I think you could just use a few workers from around here. I'll ask my supervisor if they get.
We have a captive population.
Yes, I know.
And they're very docile.
I
They
know
like
they
to be
are.
fed too, so
Yes,
if you
yes.
feed them.
I think because these questions are very similar to what I was going to suggest from my reading, and they're very similar to what I've seen in every deer study I've read, and I've read a good number of them by now. I think that this will work pretty well.
Okay.
If you want to do that, to make sure you're really hitting all the points, particularly since we're adding some educational parts to it, if I've heard anything.
Okay. We'll just keep it in mind if it
Yeah,
seems
for
like
sure.
it would help.
I'll definitely have my supervisor take it.
Great.
He's also very good at surveys, so he'll be a good sample as well.
Can I ask, do you guys feel that it's necessary to ask people about Lyme, should we bring up Lyme disease or tick-borne illness in this, like as a public concern?
That's one of the facets of this when we talk about like just safety in terms of like deer are dangerous because, fill in the blank, check all that apply.
Well, it would be like,
It's property damage, it's vehicle damage, and there are tick-borne diseases that they carry. So it could be possibly a multiple choice, although this isn't really written from the perspective of like a true false or multiple choice, maybe it could be something like that check all that apply.
I was gonna say we could also do something like, again, I'm just gonna keep pointing to the same survey, it's such a good one. Question 5 on that Cordell survey is below is a list of concerns you may have related to deer. Indicate how concerned you are about each in your area, and that includes the deer damage. They have crop loss, I don't really think that's necessary, but you could do that, and then deer damage to forest and native plants, Lyme or other tick-borne diseases. We could include there the CWD and the blue tongue, is that what it's called?
Mhm.
Sorry. And then deer vehicle collisions. I think that something like that would be a really
Well,
easy.
and I
That's
think,
good, because
and I think the key with that is using the word concern.
Yes.
How concerned are you about this, because you've already sold it to them, and the answer that you give, if you give any answer at all, it's because, yes, I am concerned.
Sure.
As
Yeah.
opposed to, I'm not concerned at all.
Right.
Yeah, so I think that would be a really strong way to look at it personally.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with you, Sarah. I think that's a good
Okay.
way to do it.
do you want me to add a few things that we talked about to this, and I can just email you I can email you the Word doc, and then.
If you want, I have notes too.
And then you can, well, if I email you the Word doc, then you can just work from it.
Yeah.
You can, if you want to
That'd be
do
helpful.
that.
Yeah, sure.
Send you the link to the website and the word.
Yes, perfect.
And I can send you the links to.
I have this one.
as well. Oh, you have this one?
Yeah.
Okay, oh, good, okay.
Yeah, I read that one when I did the deer surveys last year.
Yeah, they
You
put a
guys-
lot of, they put a lot of work into this one.
Yeah, it's really good.
Are you familiar with the alpha-gal
Mhm.
disease? So I think that's something we really haven't spoken about. And I believe there's some residents that have contracted that.
Yeah.
What is it?
I have one in my neighborhood.
Alpha-gal, it makes you allergic to red meat.
Oh, the thing from ticks, okay,
Yeah.
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 Do you, want to include that as a line as well? It doesn't matter.
Sure, I mean, it's a tick-borne
Yeah, I think
illness,
it's
so, I mean,
counted
you can
with that.
say alpha-gal or Lichia,
Lyme.
Lyme, can you get Rocky Mountain spotted fever
People? Yeah, people get it.
from ticks? Or you can just say tick-borne illness.
Yeah, you could.
They're
Yeah.
also yucky, but, yeah.
Tick-borne illness is like,
Yeah, I don't think
Lyme
I
disease.
Yeah, I can put a couple examples
you know, a
in.
couple of examples, and it's
Good
sort of all encompassing.
So, the
And
one.
but you're right.
The
that's-
one heading I was thinking about with the tick-borne illness would be that, are you aware that ticks overwinter on deer? So a lot of people don't really think about that.
All winter long.
Yeah, that's why we have such high tick population. Our deer came from Wisconsin and brought the ticks when they reintroduced the deer back in, when was that, like the 40s? 50s? 60s? These aren't even our deer, you guys.
I think they are our deer.
These are Wisconsin deer.
I think you have to own
They are
it.
And they brought the
now.
ticks. Like back when your grandparents were little, there was like no deer left here.
Right. Well, it's a moneymaker for our friends with the Department of Conservation, so. And they do, take care of the population and ensure that there's a healthy population every year. I mean, you're talking 300,000 that are harvested, every year in about a month and a half from now, so.
They feed us all.
Yeah, so. No, I think, if you two just kind of work together and just make it kind of like a back and forth, and put something together, we have something to look forward, next time we meet, it's a great start.
The, one other question from, again, this same survey I keep directing to, that I was wondering, are you guys interested in is, they have there are two interests you may have related to deer. Are you interested in knowing if the people taking this survey are hunters, or if they just like looking at the deer from their backyard? Is that something that would be useful information for you? Because that's the only other thing in here that I was like, I never really considered that as a question, but I don't know if that would be important for you guys to know.
I think that question comes up in a lot of the surveys.
Yeah, I kind of noticed it a lot.
Mhm.
You can compare the responses relative to what.
Yeah.
If there's some type of correlation that could be, pulled out of that in terms of anticipated responses based upon how they.
don't want to reduce the population
Right.
or the
Well,
hunters don't.
in all honesty, I mean, we're just not in a position where we can really afford to consider any other options other than culling the population.
Right.
Because we have no program in place and our estimates are 4 times greater than what the Department of Conservation wants us to have. And that's based upon a survey that was done 18 months ago. So I think it's good to have something, that we can say, hey, we surveyed people, and we let them give their opinions about, is this good or bad? Is this good, or which would
Yeah.
you prefer? That's, I think, a step that we have to do, but I think that our course is already predetermined on what's going to give us the most effective way to manage this population.
I think that would be good to add that.
Yep, I think so too. Yeah, it's kind of, she's already kind of got it a little bit. I'll say that the actual, it's 4 times, that's 4 times the amount. That would be another thing to add to really give the point that it's.
As far as the hunting question, if there's a way you can embed it in a bigger question, 'cause sometimes people just see that and turn them off.
Yeah.
So, if it could be embedded in one of these.
I can make it the
things,
last
maybe.
question too.
Yeah.
If nothing else, I could make that the very last question, so it's not something that they're thinking about as they're going through it.
Right.
It's kind of sneaky, but it would be.
There's merit to that.
Yeah,
There's merit to that.
usually you want to vary. I
Well,
would
and
say.
the other question is it a necessary thing for us to know?
Yeah.
Really? I mean,
Exactly.
kind of, in this,
Yeah.
for this particular situation.
A couple comments. On number 10, should there be a choice? Part of me thinks there should be something that lets them opt out of that question or express that they don't think we need to do anything.
Well, I think we discussed changing these to each a different yes/no type question, or like, are you not at all interested in this option versus moderately interested versus like very interested? So they could choose not at all interested for everything.
So would you act like, it would be like,
Yeah.
kind of like
If
not
you like
concerned,
one.
slightly concerned, moderately concerned, very concerned.
So I guess that would be reflected in that, right?
Yeah.
We tried it out.
That sounds good. And then I'm wondering about, within that one, you reference our, and I guess, I know most people don't know what our ordinances are for hunting.
Yeah.
So I'm struggling with saying, or having actions that imply some knowledge about our ordinances already. Maybe, so I'm wondering if people would not know exactly how to answer some of those, like the last one.
Yeah.
Or maybe there needs to be a little bit more for the education.
And I think that that's a good example of giving someone just a little, almost like a teaser of information. Yes, it is allowed, because some people, that may be as deep as they want to go with it versus, oh, I didn't know that, but I want to learn more. They can click on a link or go somewhere else to get, summarized, tabulated information that says this is how hunting is allowed in the city of
Maybe
Wildwood.
there's some education right before to say it's allowed on 3 acres, or
Right.
more, and boat hunting is allowed, whatever.
Yeah.
So, yeah, combining properties would be applied to combining properties to meet that 3 acre minimum.
Yeah, I think that that would be very important. I agree. Again, I definitely think we'll need to somehow add some education to this section, just because if I were looking at this, I'm not a resident of Wildwood, but if I were looking at this, I do live in West County, we have a lot of deer too, I wouldn't know what to choose.
Yeah, I don't know, and then the last one, maybe, I don't know, we need the corporate, well, I mean, basically, you want to allow residents to legally hunt
Mhm.
on allowable properties, but.
Right, is that really
I don't know
our,
the appropriate acreage, it's just, we want to allow currently legal hunting to occur by connecting hunters with property.
Right.
That's the strategy.
Yeah.
well, and do we know if we really want to get into that? Whole, that could be
Well,
a
I
big
mean-
tangled web, maybe we
Well,
should.
I mean,
even
if we
get
get a lot
into-
of responsive interest in that, that'll help us.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think we can bring up that same issue in our next topic when we start talking about public education. Because realistically, I mean, it is something that's allowed, and we can put the information out there. And there's probably people who live out in Ward 1 and parts of Ward 8 that have, large tracts of land where hunting could easily be accommodated, and they're probably not even aware of the fact that it's allowed. So, it's going to be kind of a mixed bag of people who, are aware of what it is and they're either for or against. And then there's people who are unaware and they're going to be either for or against whatever we have as a recommendation. Doesn't mean that they have to go along with it, but it's just in terms of getting the information out there and saying this is what's allowed, it lets people make that decision. So, anything else on resident survey? I think we're off to a great start there, and I think we're going to have something that's going to be really helpful next time we meet. So,
I do have one other question, kind of in relation to the education piece. Would something about like the ordinance surrounding hunting, is that something that you would be interested in putting out something on your social media in advance to the survey coming out? And so instead of relying on the survey to do 100% of the education, start kind of putting that information out there for residents to see it, so they're already kind of like thinking more about it?
I would be in favor of the latter, putting it out there ahead of time.
Yeah.
And
So that would be something to consider as well with your social media.
I wonder though, just psychologically, if you get a better survey from people, if you're wording it and you're doing the survey out, it's the first thing. Because then they're completely, they're taking it based on their own opinion and their own observation.
I'm not saying to like put out a lot of information, but at least maybe like linking something to, so that it explains what the ordinances are.
Mhm.
I'm not saying to like take a stance. I understand your concern as well. I'm just afraid that, like, again,
someone like me would look at this and be like, well, what's an appropriate acreage, or whatever term we find to use, or
Mhm.
like, what do they mean combined properties, and like, the HOA common grounds greater than a certain acreage, like, I would be really confused about kind of what that meant.
It's a sudden deeper statement
Yeah.
that, you know, perhaps
So
going there or
if
not
we
is
think we
a
can like
question.
boil these concepts down to just a couple, you know, a little bit of
Simplify.
information, so it's easily taken in. We just want to make sure that we get an educated response on this last question, because I'd say it's the most important of the questions.
There's actually a link on our city's website that highlights the hunting regulations in the states. Acreage, it says you can't combine properties, so-and-so, so I don't, I mean, that would answer that
Yeah,
people are saying. you can't
yes, please send me that
combine
link as
properties,
well.
so-
That's
yeah.
something I could also link to.
Absolutely.
And you could, if you wanted to address those situations before, if you did want to provide like an informational paragraph, you know, saying, currently, we have a no feeding ordinance with the city of Wildwood does not
Mhm.
specifically have one. The current hunting season in conservation areas is XYZ.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that's an option too, but
Sarah,
it does
what-
make the overall process longer.
What I can put together for you, because in terms of like hunting, those of us who hunt understand that there's different seasons, different methods,
Yeah.
and different times for each. In terms of compressing all that, I can put together in somewhat of like a calendar view, something that would list all of the dates, because what usually happens is when one ends, another one begins. And usually, you know, when it's youth hunting season, that's the weekend before, you know, the regular full-blown hunting season. So in terms of keeping all of it, you know, clear and concise, it's very hard to keep track of, am I
Yes.
talking about rifle? Am I talking about bow hunting? Am I talking about, you know, spitwads? You know, it's overwhelming.
Yeah, that's
So-
kind of my concern, is that it's just, there's so much information.
Right. And I'm really kind of, I mean, the Department of Conservation does great work, but I'm really kind of surprised that they don't already have something that's more of a compressed, these are all the deer seasons. Each method is a different color. You can see on the calendar when each one is out there, so.
Yeah, I don't know anything about hunting, so that'd be very helpful.
It's not complicated, you just have to,
It's just foreign to me. It's like a foreign, this whole deer thing is very foreign to me.
anything else as far as resident survey that we need to discuss before we move on?
Do you, I mean, social media, that's the next topic, I suppose.
Right. So moving on into public education, my preference for this in terms of when we were starting to talk about this was to get as much information out to the residents as possible, as easily as possible, to talk about, and again, this is kind of what I was touching on earlier, that is hunting allowed in the city of Wildwood? Yes. You know, it's short, concise Q&A type of things, FAQ kind of format, and, you know, with links to, oh, if you want to learn more about chronic wasting disease, you can go to this link. If you want to learn more about Share the Harvest, where, you know, this donated meat is going to go, you can take a link and go look at that. There's a finite amount of information that you can give to people, even when you're talking to them about something that they're concerned about, because at a certain point, people get saturated and they say, ugh, I'm going to go watch TV or do something else. And so we have to keep people's interest and give, you know, them what we call the critical few things, or not a few, but maybe 8, 10 at the very most. And I think that other people who do this for a living, Rick and I were discussing a contractor that the city uses for our social media kind of campaigns, and I've worked with her in the past, and she's phenomenal in terms of being able to put things out there that grab people's attention and they remember. So I think it's up to us just to craft what are the most important things that we want people to become aware of. What are the things that we want them to say, oh, I didn't know that. You know, and kind of put ourselves in their shoes and anticipate what are the things that are likely going to say, oh, I didn't know that deer carry Or alpha gal. I'd never even heard of that, you know, to try and get people engaged, interested, and keep their interest. So with that, did anyone have anything like specific that they thought, if we went around the room and everybody picked like one thing that they thought was the most important thing from like a public education thing that we wanted to include, and I'll start. I would say hunting. It should be something about hunting should be on that list.
Yeah, I'd say don't feed deer if you're saying hunting, it's gotta be on there.
I think the crash studies are really important and just, pinpointing the fact that that's our current, what I want people to do is connect to the fact that that's our current calling program, but I don't really want to tell them that directly.
Great way to put that. Sergeant, what would you put on the list if you?
Well, I mean, I would try to educate people about the effective methods of controlling the population, outside of, hunting obviously is one, but there's different methods that people have tried in the past, and I think that the people need to understand that a culling program is really the only way to effectively manage a population.
That's absolutely right. I mean, we don't have some of those strategies listed, but people are gonna wonder, how come we don't have sterilization listed?
Yeah.
Right.
Or we don't have track relocation.
Right, and I think that's where you can rely on Erin Shank to really, from her professional perspective and all of her experience in dealing with deer and understanding their behavior and truly caring about the animals themselves, I think she would give the best opinion as to what the best method and suggested method should be.
I'm going to call that things we can do. There's lists of things like, for instance, with relocation, we can't do it because there's the risk of moving animals that are already CWD infected. So a lot of people I would anticipate if we had a room full of people and we said, well, we can't relocate them. People who are looking for the most humane possible kind of way to solve this. Obviously, that's but the risk is there, and it's not something that's allowed. So.
And there's the cost factor,
Yeah.
some of these other things. And I think you have to remind people that controlling the population does not mean eradication.
Correct.
But that's what this is not.
I think that's important to
Ultimately.
mention, and the other thing that I think is very important to mention is the other effects on the environment from overpopulation. Because I'm not necessarily someone who would support just killing a bunch of deer necessarily,
Right.
but after reading about the other negative effects of overpopulation on other species, on the plants, and on the forests themselves, that's really important to me.
That's a great catch.
It's all about balance.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that it's really important to bring that up as well. Not as necessarily the most important of those options, but I think it's good.
So right there, we've got 7 or 8 different items already that are, I think, all equally important. But I think what the marshal said is important as well, because it is about finding that balance. And we have to defer to the experts, and that's Aaron and everyone else in the Department of Conservation. So,
I would like to add to that, with human health and deer health, maybe even on the same page.
Yeah. I think that one could go with the don't feed deer. And then also kind of with mine of how deer do their browsing or their grazing basically. Could also include something about the types of plants that you can plant that deer are less attracted to
horticulture.
as another humane way to try to control.
Yeah, not
At our
hostas.
house, yeah.
Not hostas.
Not hostas.
Those got a D rating.
We've tried everything. These deer are omnivores.
Yeah, they'll eat most things.
Yeah.
Well, if we're going to be trapping deer, we could probably go around the neighborhoods and get people to donate hostas.
Yeah, they do. They love the hostas.
No, in point of just, you know, real world kind of example, our neighborhood is in the process of redesigning all the landscaping in our cul-de-sacs. And two of the vendors that we're talking to have immediately said, how are you with deer? I said, well, what do you mean? Do you get a lot of deer in your neighborhood? I said, well, occasionally. He's like, well, you should definitely avoid this, you know, in terms of like, so it's front and center in a lot of people's minds in terms of like,
Yeah.
how much of a problem do you want to plant in the ground and deal with next spring? So,
Yeah, and then another piece of that is also the cost to the citizens of having their landscaping regularly destroyed by deer,
yeah.
because that's expensive.
And I think that we had talked about that earlier on as far as just like a financial cost. There's damage to property, there's damage to vehicles, there's, you know, damage to people's health if
Yeah.
you're talking about tick-borne illnesses. So, you know, there's damage could be monetary or non-monetary.
Absolutely.
And I think that once we kind of like put, again, I think each one of these could be like 1 or 2 bullet points, and then maybe like a punch out to, hey, here's information about this, or if it's something like Aaron, who is really, hey, we need to hear it straight from the expert's mouth about this. I can go down and, you know, I've got a video camera, and I can go down and interview her, and you know, it's like, hey, we're here live at, you know, the Department of Conservation with the, you know, expert, you know, about this, talking about fill in the blank, and then post that to the site. And people, I think that would carry a lot of weight if people saw, you know, things like this. And the other thing that comes to mind is Councilmember Remy is also a physician, and his specialty is in the infectious disease area. I think he's more along the lines of like treating sepsis, but anything that is, you know, autoimmune disorder, I think he would be a ready and willing subject matter expert if we wanted to talk to somebody about what these things can do to people. So we have a lot of a wealth of information and knowledge and expertise that we can call upon to put a human face talking about this is why you shouldn't do this, this is why this is dangerous. So I think all those things help. So I can take a stab at this in terms of like just trying to put a couple little 2-3 bullet points on each one to kind of encapsulate this is, you know, why it's important, why you shouldn't do it, why you should do it, depending on what it is, and maybe some ideas about how we craft some kind of narrative to go with each one of those so that people can see that. And then I think that this would be the one where we would work with Donna about getting that information on the city's website. So it could be something that people could click on, they could, you know, find at their leisure and just kind of educate themselves at their own pace.
And that's also, these ideas are things that we could also put in a story map, which you'd be able to link to from the website.
Okay.
Where you could go through and have it say, like, an introduction about how the population of deer is so high in Wildwood, et cetera, and then go into these different areas of why it's a big deal, and then we could even, towards the end, talk about Erin, that's the lady from
Right.
Conservation, yeah, her reasons for the options that we've given to the
Okay.
citizens, so.
And the story map can be a mixture of video and like graphics and.
I think video
pretty much-
can be included in it, I'll have to double check that.
Okay.
Hold on, I can probably check right now. When we talk about other things, but, yeah, I know it can, they're kind of mixed media.
Right. Well, just in the few meetings we've had where there has been public participation, there's nobody in the middle. People are
Yeah.
either kill them all or you're gonna do what?
I don't think they're saying kill them all. They're saying, help us with this problem.
Okay.
Might be a little stretch, but we get what you're saying.
Maybe a little bit of a stretch.
Mhm.
But yeah, strong feelings
Yeah.
on both ends of the spectrum, for sure.
I would be willing to kind of create this outline with links and some content, you know, and bring it back to you all.
Okay. Why don't you and I work on it separately and then kind of put our work together and see what looks good?
Okay.
And yeah, it looks like we'd be able to add videos to you as well, so
Fantastic.
I think it would be a really easy way to show this information.
Very good. The next item I had on the, or not that I had on the agenda, I had Michelle kind of put on the agenda is talking about capture.
Can I say one?
Oh, sure.
I just sent Debbie Ward an email, so when she responds, I'll try to set up a meeting with her.
Okay.
Do you want to be part of that?
Yes, I'd
try
like to be.
arrange it, if you have the capability. Being here during regular work hours, are you glad to?
If it's later in the day, I can be here.
All right, we'll see if we can do it later today.
Okay.
I'll hold it for that in the meantime. Or anybody else, frankly, if you want to be part of that, we can certainly put it out there.
Great. The next item on the agenda was talking about the temperature capture and cold method. I prepared a memo that Michelle ran copies of. It's just a one-sided front and back memo. This is basically a follow-up to a memo I put out at the end of August. I had come up with an idea that was kind of like a somewhat low cost but very high volume productivity type of method for capturing deer. It would have involved a circular corral with a remotely operated gate. Missouri, like a lot of other states, has a problem with feral hog infestation, and there are companies that specify in eradicating these animals. The key with feral pigs is that you have to get the entire group together. Otherwise, pigs are very smart, and they figure out, okay, don't go back there again. And if a couple of them get out, then that population jumps back up. So you really have to get the whole group all at once. And these companies set up these areas where they build an enclosure, and then over many nights of putting out corn and other bait, they have cameras that are mounted near the gates, and the camera actually is also a remote mechanism that will drop a gate electron. You could be 100 miles away and watch it happen and send a signal via your cell phone to drop the gate, and then all the pigs are trapped, and you can go in and dispatch them at your leisure. I was thinking if we could do something like that using similar technology but with higher gates, because a deer can jump over a 5-foot gate or fence very easily, then we could have the potential for trapping a large number of animals all at once. The Department of Conservation reviewed the idea. They said, no, that would put too much stress on the animals because they're feeling like they're captive, they're going to panic, they're going to hurt each other. So long story short, they said that we would not be allowed to do that. But what they did say that we could use is what's called a Clover Trap. And if you look at the back of the memo, there's a picture of what a Clover Trap looks like. And it's about, if you've ever had a dog or had a crate or a kennel that you put your dog in, it's about, I guess, probably double the size. It's 3 feet wide, 4 feet high, about 6 feet deep. It's large enough that a single deer, or probably two, could get inside. But at a certain point, once the deer is probably 2/3 of the way inside of the trap, they would kick a tripwire, which basically drops the gate at the back, and then the deer is trapped. The deer is trapped. They're not suffocated, but they have nowhere to run. They're basically confined. The sidewalls are made of nylon. That's not metal. It's a nylon, heavy like cordage type of material. And the key to this is that it's open at the bottom. So if you weren't able to get to that area for a couple of hours or maybe a day at the most, it's open at the bottom. So whatever is down on the ground, grass, other kinds of crops, corn you might put down on the ground, there's going to be a food supply for them to eat, until such time as you can get there to dispatch and remove the animal. So the other advantage of this is that they're relatively lightweight. A single person can take it apart, set it up, put it wherever they want to. They're not terribly expensive. This is the only place that I found so far that manufactures and sells these. If a person was crafty enough at fabricating, with steel and other kinds of things, you could probably make one for probably half that cost. But in terms of getting our feet wet and trying something like this, I would be of the opinion that we should at least move in that direction in terms of getting maybe 2 or 3 of these, because we have already a number of places within the city that are either owned by the city of Wildwood, existing tracts of land that are owned by either the city or St. Louis County. And there are a couple of large tracts, I think in Ward 2, at the far northeast part of the city, that are owned by some real estate holding companies. And, you know, those are private landowners who are, you know, holding onto that property for future development if we can make contact with them, or others who have large tracts of land, and we could put these in places where they're not visible to the public. I think we would have a very high success rate at, you know, trapping deer, but not necessarily putting it right next to Strecker Road or Wild Horse Creek Road. So we would want to some degree, have this be somewhat out of sight. But that's my 2 cents. I think it's a good enough idea that it at least merits us giving it a try to see what we can get out of it.
So as far as dispatching the deer, would that be police?
Well, I think that's a to be determined as far as what makes the most sense. I'm a hunter. I know how to do things like this, but in terms of who would be the best candidate to do something like this, I think we can figure that out. If we are talking about using, you know, police to do this, if we're talking about donating meat, there is the whole unavoidable topic of field dressing an animal to get it to the point where, you know, a butcher's going to take it. If it's cold enough, you know, a deer can sit out overnight. If it's 25 degrees or something, you're not going to spoil any meat. But if an animal has to be processed, then there is a certain amount of additional work involved. And if you know how to do it, it's no big deal, but it's not something that, you know, a novice can necessarily
The police
take.
wouldn't field dress the animal, you'd have to have the hunter, or somebody who would wander
Right.
along through their time.
Yeah, and I'm a bow hunter, gun hunter. Cleaning deer sucks. I mean, it's not fun. I don't think anybody's gonna donate their time to clean their
Well,
deer,
that's-
but
Well,
finding somebody that would do it for
We could use Paul.
money,
You know, he's the person that picks up the deer.
okay.
I'm sure that
if he's
I
willing to
think we
field dress a
could-
deer.
it would, you know, I'm sure that he would do that. If
I think that we could put together a list of people who,
he might deliver it.
if for some, you know, something further time and effort to take care of that, if it was worth their while to do it in furtherance of, hey, we have to do this to get it to the food bank. Because there's a cost associated with that as well,
Mhm.
Sure.
per animal. I think they do it per animal or maybe per pound.
Yeah.
Or something along those lines.
He would charge something.
Well, we'd have to pay Paul.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we'd have to pay him.
But, I mean, you're talking about something that could be, you know, one every other night. Depending on how you get them in there. How do you get them in there?
Well, you use bait. In terms of what you can do in terms of hunting in Missouri, there's very few game animals you can use bait for. Coyotes are the scourge of the earth. You can use any method you can even think of to kill coyotes because they're, you know, that loathsome. But absent that, using bait to trap deer is allowed. But again, if we did something like this, there would be a special permit issued pursuant to a trap and a capture and hold program.
It seems like when we talked about that, they've always said that the deer meat would have to be donated to
Right.
Share the harvest.
food bank or something to that effect.
So I think that if for something like this, I think we would have to move it up the chain of command and get a verdict as far as whether or not we can proceed with it. And then if we get a green light to do that, I think in short order, we could get a list of people who would volunteer their time. Because, you know, really the best time to do this is, you know, dusk and dawn. in terms of getting to those areas. So some people might have availability during the day, you know, I have availability on weekends, but Monday through Friday, my time's pretty much spoken for.
Would the police do this? I mean, obviously you're not going to field press the animal, but as far as the dispatching of the deer, the police would do that.
I don't know.
I mean, I just bring it up because I think to sell this, likely, that would be the easiest way. That we say, well, the police are going to take care of dispatching the animal, and then, you know, then, yeah, we've got to figure out how to get it dressed and then
Also,
proper slurs.
how are you gonna determine when the trap is activated? Is this alert you in some way, or do you just have to like make sure someone's checking it?
There's two different ways you can do it. If, what the low-tech kind of way would be to bait the trap in the morning, put out a fresh supply of corn, and basically make sure that the mechanism is ready to go. And then if you, say you do that at 5 o'clock in the morning, and then you come out 12, 13, 14 hours later and check on the trap. If it still looks like it's available, you would just have to, you know, and sometimes, you know, small animals could get inside and inadvertently hit the tripwire, but, you know, crawl through a hole this big to get out, and then you're looking at it, it's like, well, the door's down, what happened? Well, you know, a mouse or some other animal got in there and got back out. So there would have to be some manual intervention. The other thing is that there are, in fact, game cameras that can send a signal to a cell phone. You can monitor it remotely so that you could check on it, you know, during the day. And I mean, that option might make more sense for someone who said, hey, I could, you know, just put the bait out and then just be available for the next 48 hours. You know, I'm making just, you know, plans for the weekend or for the next couple of days. I could be on standby just in case, you know, something does happen.
Did you bounce this off of the Department of Conservation?
They are okay with clover traps.
But I mean, as far as the specific permitting process and all that, I mean, are they going to allow that? What are the requirements and regulations going to be for the program? I mean, we need to find that out, I think, before we would go any further, because they may not allow a large group of people to, you know, do this. It's probably going to be limited to a very specific group of people, and they like to make sure that the individuals that are involved in any type of culling program are properly trained.
Right.
And there has to be some methodology also to where you do this. So you have to have the population counts and everything in place. I don't know that they're going to issue a permit without you knowing what the situation is with the population in a specific area. So, I mean, we know we conducted one population count in an area, and we know that it's, you know, outside of the recommended limits, but that speaks nothing for the rest of the city. So, yeah, I think it's something that is a possibility, but I think there's some more research and asking we need to do with the Department of Conservation to just even see if it's a viable practice. And my concern would be that it would be pretty demanding of man hours. It wouldn't be very efficient. If you're doing this in remote areas, then you have to question the ease of access to set up the traps, to retrieve the traps, to get the animals out. There's a lot of issues, and I think one of the biggest concerns of residents would be how you're going to euthanize the animals,
Right.
and who's going to do that, and they would want to ensure that it's done humanely.
Right.
And I don't know, I'd have some concerns about the level of stress an animal's under in a small trap like that. And I've killed several deer that have been injured, you know, due to accidents and whatnot. And, you know, it's something that I just think the animal would really be under a great deal of stress. And I don't know that would be something that we would want to induce or inflict upon the animals. But it's an option, and I think if we did some more research and spoke with Aaron about those concerns, but I think it's something that, a lot of residents are gonna wanna have more information about probably.
Okay. I think along those lines, what might make sense is to maybe take a dual path and, get additional information from Aaron, but at the same time, if there's a consensus that this is something, a method that we should explore further within, this address as well, at the same time we're getting information from Aaron, prepare something to send up the chain of command, and Rick, I'll look to your, leadership here in terms of how best that should be communicated and to whom, as a proposal or something to say, this is an idea that we are getting additional information on, so that we can at least get a preliminary, hey, we like the idea, or hey, that's crazy, think of something else.
I think going back to, I don't know if you were at that council meeting, but it seemed like when it was first suggested we have this gear management committee, I think there was this feeling that we really need to get resident feedback before we get too far down the road, especially with something like a calling program. So I'm thinking that it would be helpful to have the results from the survey in hand, so we can say that there is support for doing this.
Sure.
If we don't see that at all in the survey, that's not going to be very helpful for moving forward, frankly. But I think the council's really going to be looking for something like that.
And I think the conservation department probably views this type of a trapping program something that they would issue a special permit to a private landowner for, that's experiencing crop damage or, specific issues with the deer, causing problems. So as far as it being a widespread program over the entire city, we probably have a bit of work to do as far as, like I said already, we'd have to do the population counts and everything for certain.
I'm glad you mentioned population counts, because it reminded me or struck a memory of something, regardless of anything else that we do. When you guys did the survey, was that like overtime for the guys who were trying to do that?
Yeah.
I think that that's something that we should do on an ongoing basis regardless. Because in terms of managing with data, that's about the easiest thing that we can do. Although I'm not saying what you guys do is, it is time consuming to get out there and to look for them, and there's methodology to that. But from a cost justification, time justification, taking these officers away from what they normally do, it's like, hey, we need you to put this hat on today. It's something I think that we need to do on a recurring basis. And that might be something that, I talked to Aaron about and say, hey, would it make sense to do that twice a year in terms of, when, fawns are born? Do we want to do the sample at that time, or do we want to do it, prior to that? What makes the most sense in terms of when we do that sample?
So they have to be conducted from November to February, basically.
Okay.
That's the time frame for any type of population
All right.
study. Can't be conducted at any other time. So, yeah, but the distance sampling is really the best method to use. I think you can do an aerial survey, but you have to have snow on the ground to be able to do that either. So, and you have to have the aircraft and, the photographic equipment and everything else, so it's kind of complicated to go that route.
And I don't know, we want to open up the box of like using a drone to do something like that.
Yeah, I just don't know that you can
Yeah.
capture a large enough area with a drone.
I don't think you'd be able to do it.
I don't think so.
So, the last time we took this to council, we asked for authorization to do additional distance sampling, and we got rejected. Right? I forget when it was exactly.
Yeah, I think a comment was made that we know that we have more deer than we should have, but we understand that, but in order to proceed with any type of a management program that's authorized by the Department of Conservation. It's gonna be a required component as far as a culling program. If we just wanna say, yes, we understand that we have more deer than we should have, and pursue other avenues such as encouraging hunting, expanding, modifying the ordinances to increase the harvest, then, we wouldn't have to, it wouldn't be mandatory to do the population counts. But then you're not getting a measure as to what your effectiveness is.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I mean, if you're trying to figure out if what you're ultimately going to do is having any impact, you really have to do that.
I think you have to do it in order to gauge effectiveness, or if, for whatever reason, this doesn't grow legs, and 8 months from now, we're still having the same conversations, to say, hey, guess what, another survey's come up, and the population has gone up 20%. Then you have something empirical to take to them and say, well, this is the result of our inaction, is that, it looks like it's gone up.
No, I think it's very important.
Any idea what that cost in terms of like overtime?
Well, it just depends on what size of an area, you want to.
If it would be the same area, you guys had to go out like 3 times.
Yeah.
At least.
Yeah.
Like 3 different.
So, yeah,
periods.
I think we went out 6 nights, I think.
Yeah.
And we had 4 officers on each night.
Yeah.
So, and then the survey period for it was a 5 square mile area, is that right, or was it 10?
Gosh, I'm sorry.
5.5 comes to mind from
Yeah.
what
It
Aaron
was
said.
closer to 5.
5.
Yeah.
So, for the 5 square mile area, so that's, so you have to double your linear miles that you travel in the survey area in order for your data to be valid. So you take a 5 square mile area, you have to have 10 linear miles of road that you traverse.
You guys have 2 different tracks.
Yeah. So, we split it up into 2 different areas, and then each area has to be surveyed, 3 times. So, we were out there for 6 nights. And, so, let's see. So it's about 16 times 4, whatever that is.
64.
So that's about 64 man hours to do a survey for a 5 square mile area.
Okay.
Is that something that we're getting ready to go into our budgeting, we are budgeting for next year, is that something that the police can budget for?
Yeah, we could, I mean, it could be, budgeted over time, and I would imagine that it would be eligible to use the Proposition P funds just because of the impact on public safety. But yes, it would certainly be something that we would have to incorporate into the budget because it's a pretty significant amount of cost.
Right. And then, if a culling program is to move forward at some point, and there's going to be expenses essentially associated with that, I'm not sure how they're going to get budgeted or where the money would come from.
I think our recommendation was initially to do surveys in 3 specific 10 square mile areas. So you're not gonna cover the entire city, but areas where we felt it was important to, know what the population was, and areas where we could, maybe implement the program. And
I think that would be really valuable from a data standpoint if you found like the population in a different area was significantly higher than that original population that we found, or significantly lower, you would know where you most
Need to
need to
focus,
focus your
right.
resources. I think it would be in the long term a potential cost saver to do additional surveys of different areas.
And to our survey that Michelle put together, I think that that's a great place to also bring that in, based upon the responses that we get from this. If we see a lot of people in ward number 2 or ward number 1 or wherever saying, oh yeah, I see at least on an average how many, per week, it's 20 plus easily. If we see some, hot signatures on that.
You mentioned to see that, yeah, so some thought.
Yeah, so, and that should.
Anecdotal, but still.
That's right, yes.
But, yeah.
Yeah, they saw it.
Yeah.
It was too late.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah, but I'm just being funny, but yeah, when you're on your property and looking out your window, you know what's out there generally, you'll have an encounter with the deer if they're there, so. Yeah.
Is there, from the sampling that was done last year, so does the culling program, what's the length of time in between? Does it have to be sampling program and then the following?
So I believe
Year.
Aaron said that annually, once a year,
Mhm.
you would do your, population surveys.
Mhm.
And then, as far as, were you asking if you would do the culling at the same interval, or is that what?
I think
Yeah,
what you're asking
so
is-
what's the time limit, I guess, after you do a
Would you
distance
be able to
survey?
do the culling that same year, or would you have to wait until the next year to do the culling?
No, I think, well, you'd probably have to wait until the next year to be able to do the culling program, because I think the culling falls kind of in line with the deer season, yeah, because you have to be able to sex the animals, and that's that period really where they have their antlers, so that way you know you're killing does.
Mhm.
Aaron mentioned to me that the culling program usually starts at the end of rifle season. So you're talking, it opens, the first component of it opens the third week in November, but there's different pieces that are going, because there's a rifle season, there's a bow season, there's a muzzle loading season, there's, sticks and stones, other things. But whenever that last season ends, which is like the middle of
January
January.
15th when both
Yeah.
seasons.
Yeah, that sounds right.
So whenever that end of the season is, that's when they would be looking to say, okay, your permit is from this day, if it's, January 16, or they would pick the duration, but it would likely start at the end of bow season, or whatever alternate methods, I think alternate methods is coterminous with bow.
Yeah, it runs through January
Yeah.
7th, so that chart you were talking, that's right, they've already made it, so
Okay.
they've got a nice little. So, yeah, the season ends January 7th. So,
So if we
So
wanted
the-
to use that 2018 data to do a culling program in January, just for example, that's what we would have to do.
we could,
Otherwise, we would have to do a distance we would have to do a sampling survey and then plan for the following year.
yeah, I think they'd require there be a current survey though,
Yeah.
so I don't think we'd be able to rely on, I can't state
So
with
it would be
certainty, but-
immediate, it would be, you have to do
Yeah.
the November through,
I'll ask her.
So we could, if we knew we needed to do a population study, then we could make that happen, and probably get it done in time, especially if you're talking about a 5 square mile area. We could certainly get a survey done for one 5 square mile area in time to have probably a month and a half of culling time.
which would be January, February.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's just trying to get a timeline.
Yeah, so the thing is that the population counts, it's all dependent upon weather too. So if there's rain or the wind is too high, you can't do your survey.
I will reach out to Aaron tomorrow and try and get an answer to that question, specifically, how recent does our sampling survey need to be in
Right.
order for you to issue a cull permit? And then hopefully I can get something back from her pretty quick, and then we can use that as justification to put together an ask for council for a funding line item, for the next year, to say, hey, we need to be able to do a distance sample, because we have to have current data if we're gonna do this.
Right.
And so you guys know, just for when we had that conversation, it was March, mid-March when we did it last time.
Right.
So mid-March of 2018.
2018.
Yeah, so we got a late start.
Yeah.
So yeah, if we knew it going into it ahead of time, you know, we can really start late November.
I will say, if it gets into the beginning of 2020, it'll take me a little longer to get the analyses done. I'm very busy when the year switches over with annual reports.
Right.
This
With all the crime data.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so much. So, either you would need to write me in some overtime as well,
Right.
or, I would just get it pushed back a little bit.
Sure.
My schedule days.
Right.
And so, yeah, in line with that, we would also need to decide, you know, the areas and, you know, because that'll have a big, a bearing on how much needs to be budgeted. So if you just wanted to do maybe like a pilot type, you know, program and limit it to a smaller area, we can certainly do that. Or we can, you know, look at the bigger picture and try and figure out what areas we would want to.
And while I have her on the phone with that, I will try and get some answers from her in terms of like a who, what, when, where, why, how, as far as like if we used, you know, Clover Traps, to get all of those
Right.
questions answered, because there's things that they're gonna say, from their perspective, it's yes or no, or you have to do it this way. It's like it's pretty black and white from their perspective. From us, you know, communicating to the residents, it gets a little bit more gray, a little bit more touchy-feely perhaps in terms of why we're doing this. Whereas the Department of Conservation, I would see being very heavy on how you do things. So I'll try and get that information from her as well, so we can have that. Anything else on that topic that we need to kind of include for what, you know, anything we need to get from Aaron additionally?
One thing I would consider when you're doing the next, when you're asking her where the next area should be to sample, is to consider, is it a good area to do control in? So, and maybe choosing an area that has a high population density, but also a lot of opportunity for different possible strategies, could be a good way to, because I feel like the Strecker Road area, it's kind of, it's smaller properties, right? There's not like a lot of, I wonder if there's not a lot of good places to do a control.
Yeah, like Strecker Road, no, but I mean, you have, like Shepherd Road and, Valley, and there's a considerable, amount of locations where you could do calling.
The locations that I saw were along, and this was on that GIS map that I saw that you guys had put on the city's website. It was along Cox Creek, north of Manchester Road. There are, you know, a number of tracks, somewhat irregularly shaped, that adjoin subdivisions, other kinds of properties, but it's in that watershed area. And again, I don't think we would want to do something where, you know, animals are going to end up drowning. But there's some of them were quite large and could accommodate, you know, something like this, because, you know, people generally don't go back into areas like that, and it's kind of hiding in plain sight.
So I'm just thinking, I'm just doing math in my head here. So there'd be, even if we did the Clover Trap thing, right? There's a limited period of time that we put them out, and it's, what is that, 2, 3, 4 weeks?
Well, you'd be from, generally, after the second week in January, probably.
Okay, so mid-January to, would be,
So then-
I'm certainly at a stop point.
Yeah, through March, probably, I would think.
Okay. All right.
And
So
the important
significantly
thing,
longer.
with the trapping, with further training, you'd be able to, like, with the population counts, it's important for them to be an antler, because you're viewing them from a
Right.
distance, and there's no other way to accurately sex the animal.
Right. And I'm just thinking for the population control. So think a 60-day period, I mean, not, are we gonna be getting a deer a day with the trap? Probably not.
Probably not.
Right?
Yeah.
So let's say we hit on 50%, which is still probably high.
Yeah.
From just a standpoint of time and effort and money, is culling 30 or fewer deer during that period, is that gonna be significant enough to affect the population?
That's what I was thinking.
I'm just thinking from a time and effort perspective, if we were gonna ask an employee of the city to go out and check the traps, if we were gonna ask the police department
Right.
to euthanize the animals on a regular basis, and if we're not gonna be hitting at 50%, if it's below 30 animals, but I don't know what the full size of the herd is,
Yeah.
right? So I'm not an expert in this, and I think a good question to ask Aaron at Conservation would be, is this gonna have if we were to cull 30, let's say that's a good season for us, is that gonna be enough to significantly impact the population? Or just even impact the population, just take significant out of it? I don't know, that's why I'm just putting the question forward, as we were talking about, I was just trying to figure that out from
In the
a
last.
cost-benefit perspective.
Right.
In the last deer survey, they counted 568 animals. There could have been some repeats, so we'll say 500.
So we counted 568, or did we extrapolate from the count?
We
estimate?
counted
Okay.
specifically
So-
568.
So is that what we leave, is that what they consider the herd, or do
Sorry,
they?
548.
Okay.
It's hard to.
Or do they
give
estimate
you-
from that and say, well, it's probably
Yeah.
closer to
So
700?
it's hard to give you a specific
Right.
number because again, like the formulas that you use
Right.
to estimate deer per square mile takes into account all of this stuff. Just because you might recount deer
Right.
night after night.
So in any case, though, if that number is
Yeah.
550, let's say it's
Yeah.
600, just for easy math purposes.
Let's even say it's for 300, that's another
So,
30 is a very
you
small
know, the
number.
question then becomes, if you cull less than 10%
Yeah, is that
of any
significant?
herd, is that gonna get you where you think you need?
Should-
Or is it a matter of you just do it over several years and then it begins to have an
I
effect?
think it's both.
I do not know.
I think
do not
it's,
know.
it's both, because when I talked to Erin about it, she stressed it a couple of 2 to 3 times. It's like, she said, the main thing you guys have got to understand is that we haven't done anything.
Right.
So anything's going to be an improvement.
Okay.
But she did qualify that and say, hey, you're not going to, in my line of work, in accounting and finance, he said, you never build $1 million fence around a $100 cow. That's just crazy to do. So cost benefit always,
Yeah.
comes into play. But I think that for what the traps cost, they're like $800 a piece, and if you could extrapolate what a cost per animal would be to make it worth someone's while to go out and do that.
I wasn't really worried about the cost per
Yeah.
animal, I'm just thinking about the time and effort put in by the city, if it's gonna benefit us long-term,
Yield
that's
a
all.
high enough number.
Yield a high enough number to
Yeah.
impact the population, which I think is what we need to do,
Yeah,
I
clearly.
think the
But
number is
I'm just
about
curious.
115.
And she may know that.
yeah,
She may know just by what she does.
Okay.
I'm
Based
just
on,
curious.
if you had 568 and you have 50% of the population was female, I remember her saying you have to get 40% of that female population is going to help you start making a dent.
Gotcha.
And that number comes out to 113.
Yeah,
So,
Department of Conservation, they have. I
You have
think
to
they
cull
have-
100?
Sure, I'm sure they do, I'm
Yeah,
not aware of
yeah,
it.
they'll
Yeah.
specifically say
Yeah.
you're authorized
3 a
to
night,
cull
4 days a week.
200.
That's
you
12 a
know.
week.
I kind of figured they would issue a permit and say no
Yeah.
more than that.
Yeah, yeah, they are very specific. about
Yeah,
it.
that's the cost.
well, then at that point, is.
Just so we have an
structure-
idea, do we need 2 traps, or 3
Like
traps?
more.
I'm not against it, I'm just saying, how do we,
You got
for our own
costs.
purposes, how do we quantify this? We say we're gonna do it to be effective,
Just,
rather than just doing it
I'd like
to
to
tell
know
the
how
public, oh, look,
effective
we're doing
these
something.
traps
Right.
are and how easy they are to use, like what's the ease of.
well, the good news
Feeding
is
a deer,
that
though, and
deer are
even
not
if you've ate.
particularly known for their intelligence. And especially after the hunting season is over, because what they do know is and if you live in an area where there are deer, it's amazing how they disappear on November 16. They're everywhere a couple of days before, and then magically they seem to just run into the woods. But that's, aside from that, they don't really have much intelligence. And given the fact that we're talking about like mid-January into February, it's cold, there's snow on the ground, other food sources are scarce, and then all of a sudden they come across something that's like, hey, that is corn over there,
Right.
let's go check it out.
Right.
It's gonna be too tempting for them to resist.
It just looks like a hard thing for them to get into. There's like a lot of ropes involved and they're not smart. Like finding the entrance is gonna be,
Yeah, it's 6 feet tall.
Yeah.
It's 3 feet, it's 4 feet tall, I'm sorry, it's 6 feet deep, 3, and again, we could probably get one to whatever specifications we need. There was another one on here that was like $1,000 made for elk, so I don't know that we need to go to that extreme.
no.
But if an animal is hungry enough, they're gonna find a way to get inside, to get to it.
I would like to know a little more about the success rate of this, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I wanna do a little research.
No, I think it's a good idea, there's no question, I just, in my mind, I'm just trying to think.
So
It's a good
if you
effort.
if you bought 3 traps and you had them out 4 nights a week, 4 days a week, or 5 days a week, I mean, you could catch 12, 15 animals a week.
Right.
Times 10 weeks, maybe 150, 120, 150.
I think what,
Am I?
You'd have
And
to
that
move
might
it
be-
around a little bit.
You have to move it around, yes.
Yeah.
Probably.
I think
Is that
knowing.
enough to make it done?
I think knowing where, again, per the survey, where we have a lot of
Sure.
animals, and using that information, because again, that's a good selling point to go back to the residents and tell them, hey, based upon the information you gave us, we were very successful along Clayton Road, you know, where the Montessori school is down, there's like there's a creek that runs through, I don't know if it's Cox Creek or not, but there's some green space down there next to a waterway that, that could be an area. And I've seen many, many deer down there. So again, taking what, people can tell us, hey, it's just like fishing where there's no fish versus
Right.
where you see them jumping out of the
Yeah.
water.
No, I get it, you could put one up on my patio, I guarantee you would get one at night, because they're coming after our plants, but yeah,
Yeah.
I just, effort-wise.
So I think the other thing is that, finding someone who's willing to devote the time to it, I think best case scenario would be if it was within line of sight from a road, so that if you have binoculars, if there was enough visible light, you could, yep, still empty, I'm gonna drive to the next one, still empty. Because that way you can check on them, periodically. For a little bit of money, I mean, $150, maybe $200 at the most, you can get a game camera that will transmit a video signal, maybe not video, but just, it's like a snapshot image. And you can say, hey, send me a picture every 15 minutes or every 30 minutes. You put it on a schedule. And then you could get that sent to your phone and say, oh, I got one. I'll be back in an hour. So there's ways you can increase the effectiveness of the human involvement in that short of.
I was thinking you'd have whoever go by once a day, and if there's a deer there, you take care of it. You come back the next day. I mean, is that unreasonable to do something like that, or would they?
I think given, if there were people who were willing to do that, if it was worth their while, or if they were on board with it, throw them a few bucks to make it worth their while, and or if they were really behind the cause and wanted to help out, we could get people that way. But there definitely has to be someone there to dispatch the animal, clean the animal, and get it ready to be collected. Because again, that time of year, it's gonna be cold enough that, if you dress it correctly, you can get it to the butcher the very next day, but you can't leave it out overnight.
Right.
Sure.
Other questions on topic?
Sorry.
And maybe the first question is whether we can get Erin to come back either to this committee. I know she's really busy,
Yeah.
and she's given us her time before, but maybe that's the first question, is it worth asking her just to see if she can show up?
Okay.
If not, obviously, if you can get time on the phone with her, that's almost as good.
Oh, yeah.
By and large, that's gonna be good, and probably we can address the question.
Yeah, she's been very accommodating for phone calls.
Yeah.
that when I've talked to her about different things. But she does make it pretty, it's like, you know, evenings and weekends are kind of precious.
Yeah, I'm sure they are.
Yeah. Moving on, anything under miscellaneous we need to discuss that, you know, hanging out from last time or maybe going forward we need to include, or are we missing anything? I know one of the things that I think that council member Dr. Greg Nani mentioned early on, and this might be something just to kind of keep in the back of our minds, when it comes to bow hunting, currently within the city, it is not allowed for adjacent property owners to say, hey, I've got 2 acres, you've got 1 acre, you put them together, that becomes 3. Other municipalities allow that, and it tends to, it seems like from what I've seen and heard that it works pretty well. We do not currently allow that. I would be in favor of allowing that, but it's not up to me in terms of saying that this is something we want to do. It would be up to the council to make that call. I don't know how we would get them to possibly reconsider that opinion.
Well, that's a survey question,
Yeah,
so I
it's-
would think the feedback from that would have been.
Agreed.
Yeah.
If
That
the
would go a long
citizens
way,
strongly
yeah.
want that, if a majority of the citizens strongly want that, I think the council would have to take that under advisement.
We hope so. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's make it a survey question.
It's on there already?
Yeah.
Oh, it is, great.
Yeah.
I missed it.
It's part of number 10.
Okay, got it. Perfect. Anything else under miscellaneous we need to consider either now or past or future? Okay, next meeting date, I think that towards the end of the month seems to be working well for people. We're getting into like a holiday time. You know, I think we would be looking after Thanksgiving if we did like, you know, end of, or like a right at, oh, I'm sorry, I'm off by a month. Like if we were like 11/1, we would be before the holiday season. Does that day
So-
look good for people? I'm pulling up my calendar now.
Halloween is on the 31st on a Thursday. 4 weeks would fall
The 31st is Halloween.
Yeah, the 5th is election day. What's that? It's a big deal during this particular, for where we live at this point in time, but
4 weeks is the 29th, Tuesday the 29th.
what is it, the 12th? When was the 12th? Tuesday, November 12th.
City council.
Yeah, that would be, you know, you're getting into meetings. That's the one thing, we've been kind of meeting towards the last week of the month, which has been much easier to schedule.
Yeah.
And I would think that last week of October should be pretty easy to schedule. For that same reason, the 29th, 4 weeks from today, if you want to.
I'm free on the 29th. We want to tentatively say October 29th.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that also has advantages because we're just before Board of Public Safety and we're City Council, so depending on where we're going with things, we need to report back.
Okay, I like it. We'll just go with October 29th.
Michelle will check in to make sure there is a room or if this room is available, and we'll send, Michelle will send something out on that date, assuming it works.
All right, if there's nothing else, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. So moved. Got a second?
Second.
All right, thank you, everybody. Meeting adjourned.